What if I told you that the Ryder Cup tested more than just swings? It tested mental fortitude. The crowd wasn't just loud, it was downright hostile. Who cracked, who held firm, and what you can learn for your game.
We are diving into that today, the mental game behind the ropes.
Bethpage Black was beautiful and brutal. Home crowd for the US, but for Europe, a sea of hostility. Fans heckled, insults flew, even a beer was thrown at Rory's pipe. Europe won 15-13. But in the battle beyond the shots, who had the stronger mind?
We're going to walk you through some of the specific areas of what happened, teach you some mental tools, that way you can take these on the course.
Welcome back, Golf Psychos, to the Golf Psycho podcast, where golf drives you psycho or you're psycho about golf. I'm Carlos Benavides, mental game coach out of Austin, Texas. Joined with me today, my beautiful wife, Laurie.
Hi, I'm Laurie Benavides, Carlos's wife, coaching partner, and an occupational therapist.
Today, we're going to be going over everything that took place at the 2025 Ryder Cup. We're going to go into the mental game, the locking of the horns of minds. This was very, very, very interesting. But to just kind of jump right in, you already know where this is going. The behavior of the fans this year wasn't great, and it was disappointing to see. It was embarrassing to see. You're going to hear us talk about it throughout the pod, and the factors that it played throughout this whole thing. I think it's very difficult to ignore. It spilled into a lot of things this year, and hopefully we take a lot of learning lessons from it. But I do want to go into specifics as far as, where the hostility played a factor in the mental game of the players, or where it didn't play a factor in some of the games, in some of the golfers. But it was really, really interesting to see. And just to jump right in to kind of not sum things up, but I think that at the end of the day, the fans on the American side actually hurt the Americans. This is just my take and my opinion. I think that this created a lot of factors that the Americans weren't prepared for emotionally and mentally. And the one thing that we need to understand when it comes to the level of mental game that you're dealing with at this level of pro and these kinds of golfers, the best of the best in the world, is that what the crowd attempted to do on the mental game side was to knock the Europeans off of their game, right? It's really clear. That's the attempt that was made.
That was the
here,
intention,
right?
Correct.
And it got louder. And it got more intense and it got more hostile as time went on, because the Americans just weren't getting it back, right? So the level had to intensify to meet the frustration of the crowd. And I think that what ended up happening is that the attacks being sent, we could call them attacks. Well, let's just call it the hostility being directed at the Europeans, came from a place of what I would say and argue is the idea of what an amateur golfer thinks bothers other golfers. And when we're dealing with here is a very, very elite group of golfers, the best of the best, the 1% of the 1%. And the idea that knocking them off of their game is done through hostility and trying to get in their head. Can it? Sure. But it backfired. It backfired. The Europeans continued to play well, regardless of it. If anything, it fueled them. Yeah. And when you look back at Tiger Woods and Earl talking about Tiger's mental game and how he'd be there messing with him and annoying him and bothering him and trying to get into his head. And there were many times where, Earl will tell him, hey, forget about me. You hit the shot, and you do what you need to do. And Tiger turns around and hits it and then looks at Earl like, oh, take that, So that's essentially what was happening here. You can't disturb these minds the way the amateur golfer gets disturbed. If anything, you're going to create fuel for them. And I think that's what we saw out here. I think that was a huge mental game factor that was intended to throw them off. And it actually did quite the opposite.
Agreed. I think with what you were just saying regarding Tiger and his dad, that's that distraction, intentional training. We're going to train intentionally for those kinds of distractions and noise and heckling. And at this level, I wouldn't be surprised, and I would hypothesize that a lot of these players, clearly the European players probably do this because you've seen it, where they have probably trained that as well.
And so are the Americans, right? The
yeah.
Americans have they're amazing golfers too. They've got
It's the 1% of the 1%
yeah,
that you were saying.
they're all out there for a reason, but this is definitely a factor that even they weren't fully prepared for. And I mentioned earlier that I think it worked against the Americans for two different reasons. One, the one that I just mentioned, right, is that it actually fueled the Europeans, right?
I'm going to use my mental game training now.
It didn't work, right? So, and then the other factor that I think that maybe most overlook or perhaps don't get discussed is that the Americans, yes, these are my folks. They're cheering for me. I love that they're so enthusiastic.
As an American player.
As an American player, yes, these are my folks, and I've got to perform for them. But I think that the American players, again, we're talking about elite mental game here, right? So we're talking about folks that are clearly aware of a lot mentally, right? So if it was me putting myself into their shoes, I would say that the feeling, if I could feel it through the TV, then in person it must be even more amplified. But I can feel the frustration of the crowd because they're intensifying their banter. They're intensifying their
I wouldn't call it cheering. I'd call it jeering.
Yeah, they're intensifying their psychological warfare, right? The hostility onto these players, and it's ramping up because the frustration is ramping up. And why is the frustration going up? Well, because my American team isn't winning. And the American players can sense that. And I am convinced that's what hurt them, because not only are they feeling the frustration coming from the fans and how palpable it is, but they're also at this point probably feeling a little bit of embarrassment. They're feeling a little bit of those cringe feelings like, oh my gosh, this is really happening. And they're really laying into the Europeans, and, emotions are flying, tensions are going up. So I can't see a reality where that's not a factor. If you're one of the Americans playing out there and you're seeing this happen, at some point it can create a little bit of a distraction. And I know I just said, oh, well, these players are used to these things. They're used to pressure. They're used to, all of that stuff. But what I'm suggesting is that they may not be used to so much embarrassment. They may not even be used to dealing, if they're dealing with a little bit of guilt for what's happening. I imagine if you're one of these players, you're kind of going, oh my gosh, yikes, this is new.
It is new.
And because it's new, it's slightly outside of the emotions and the mental game hurdles that you're used to feeling. It's not often that these pros go up and are having to deal with a little bit of guilt, a little bit of shame, a little bit of embarrassment. Yes, of course you can make that argument. We're golfers, right? Embarrassment, shame, all of that. Yes, of course we feel that, but for different reasons. This isn't usually because it's coming from golf, not because it's coming from the crowd.
The external
This
source.
is coming from an outside source, not an internal source where you can beat yourself up about the golf that you're playing or the golf that you're not playing, right? This is a whole new factor. So just to sum it up again, I believe this helped the Europeans. I believe it fueled them and made them play better, and they rose to the occasion that much more. And I believe it hurt the Americans, and we saw it out there because they're dealing with this factor that they're not used to feeling. They're feeling emotions that they're not used to feeling, and it's not actually helping. It's actually creating more pressure on the Americans because, well, I can feel the crowd getting more restless and frustrated.
I agree. I would hypothesize that as well. And I could also see how maybe the Americans going into this would go into this as we're supposed to have the home advantage, right? We've all gone to a game where there's been the home team, and the home team crowd is cheering them on, and there's these expectations of we're going to win. And sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. And of course, when it doesn't,
man.
it can be very, very disappointing. So expectations was probably one thing that I wanted to mention. And then the other thing that I was also thinking about is that negative bias brain that the American crowd gave I know Carlos and I talked about this a bit in terms of their support to their team, because they're kind of giving all this hostility because they're trying to support the American team. But unfortunately, they didn't do it in the best way that was the most effective,
Mhm.
because they were shouting all these insults and things to the European team to try to get them rattled, versus focusing their energy
Mhm.
in that positive support for their team, as
Yeah.
much as loud or as vocal or as obvious, maybe is a better word.
Yeah, you could almost argue that the crowd was selfish
Mm-hmm.
and made it more about themselves than they did about the golf. And, as you mentioned earlier, and we were talking about this, and where the negative bias brain also sees, well, rather than supporting my crowd, let me tear apart the other team.
Mm-hmm.
And we can think of that as like, well, it's support because I'm going after your opponent. But I think that there's a fine line where that just becomes a distraction, and it
Mm-hmm.
starts becoming its own factor and its own
Mm-hmm.
beast. And as I saw, I think it was Rory who said something along the lines of like, there's a difference between banter and just outright abuse and hostility.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree. I think there's a lot to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I hope that this never happens
Mm-hmm.
again.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this is
I agree.
definitely a turning point in golf, something that we've never quite seen before. I have read a lot of comments on social media, and you'll see comments, that defend it and say things like, well, we had this happen to us in Europe, or this happened, over here. But I gotta disagree with that. It never on this level.
Never on this level.
I think you can have, banter that sort of peaks and maybe crosses the line ever so slightly. And I think that's what people maybe point out.
Mm-hmm.
But this wasn't just crossing the line. This was just invading it,
No,
like
this is new
this was a
at this level.
whole new level. This felt like WWE. I think like I said, yeah, we see banter cross the line in golf before, but not where it just stays on the other side and,
Mm-hmm.
and becomes something else. And if we can't admit that, there's just a certain level of truth that we have to be able to be okay with, and that's okay. That's how we learn. We're
Mm-hmm.
allowed to make mistakes. Was
Absolutely.
this a mistake by the crowd? Yes.
Yes.
The crowd's allowed to make mistakes. We can look back on this, and I think that if you're like most people, golf purists, and go, hey, well, there's no place in this for golf. This is a gentleman's sport. This is a ladies' sport. This is a sport of respect and honor. And that is just not where we're going. And I think that there is something that the PGA Tour is going to have to look into. I did see people, hey, well, this was all kind of teed up by the initial performances or the comedian in the beginning that was,
Mm-hmm.
getting people to cheer F you, F you. And it kind of just stayed on that level.
Mm.
So, yes, we have to be careful with how we set things up to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And could that have been the big sort of overarching what led to all of this? Yes, but the people are still in charge of themselves,
Mm-hmm.
So
You're right.
is that a factor? Yes. Is it everything? No. Is
Mm-hmm.
it a big part? I would say it is, but it's not everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a big part of having strong mental game on and off of the course is being able to call yourself out,
Right.
being able to call yourself on your own bullshit. And this is one of those cases where I do see in the comments, 99% of golfers, this was not okay. Tom Watson, go to the game, highly respected in golf, saying, hey, this is atrocious. This is
Mm-hmm.
not great. This is embarrassing.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
Yep.
So I'm hoping that we can take a lot of lessons from this and move on.
We are definitely going to go through those lessons. And I agree with you. This wasn't our best sportsmanship. But like you said, we can learn.
Mm-hmm. But aside from that, the locking of the horns and seeing the best mental games duke it out. You saw, tenacity on the American side coming back
For sure.
and finishing strong. Were they able to get it done? No. But to me, what was the most impressive out of the whole thing was just Europe's ability to stay in the game, not get rattled. I think that the golf still showed up, which was incredibly
Mm-hmm.
impressive. I think there's a difference. We see Rory reacting to the crowd and saying, you to the people in the crowd. And my take on that, because there are some people who are saying, well, look at the way he's behaving. Yes, in response to this behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm making that pass for the crowd because I can say, well, in response to what they heard the comedian saying, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
we have to look at the big
Of
picture.
who's setting the stage.
Exactly. We can say, oh, well, Rory's behavior wasn't great here. And technically, you'd be right. Yes, you're right. That's not good. We can be better than that. And I'm sure he'd agree, hey, did I have to do that? I had a moment, yes. But is he doing this just to do it? Or is it in response
Mm-hmm.
to hostile, toxic behavior?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I subscribe to that idea of what manipulation is, right? Manipulation can be when you make it about somebody else's response to toxic behavior. And in this case, that's what I'm seeing. This isn't because Rory just decided to turn to the crowd and be like, F you.
Mm-hmm.
There was already a lot that led up to this. And
You're right.
it was a response to this behavior. So in that sense, I understand the way I also understand, hey, well, did the crowd end up here by themselves? They were kind of set up this way from the beginning. One could make that argument.
One could make that argument, which I think then goes back to the response and reaction aspect as a whole, where, yes, the comedian maybe did start some of those things. And then as the collective continued, now, of course, the collective is made of a bunch of individuals, and it could have had some individuals and be like, hey, that's not what we do here, right? And like boo the commentator or the comedian, right? That could have been a possibility. Like you were saying, what ends up happening to me, it sounds like, is the crowd then just reacted and went along with.
Oh, so this is the way it's going to be.
This is the way it's going to be. We're going to go
Okay.
with it versus maybe taking a moment to like, wait a minute, this isn't how we want to be. Or like, Rory, okay, maybe I shouldn't have said that. But these are all just kind of reactions to immediately what's happening because it seems like emotions were a bit high.
Absolutely. Competition is a thing. The ego loves competition, right? And I think that there's no other way to put it, right? That this just, at the end of the day, was not good. I hope it never happens again. This should be the first and the last time that we see this. And I'm hoping that we take a lot of learning lessons from this. And there's no place for this in the game of golf. We have more things in common than we have differences. And we as golfers need to focus on that. And again, as I mentioned earlier, a big part of the mental game is having the ability to call yourself out, looking past your biases and just being completely and totally honest. And I'm hoping that, we can do that as a collective. And we're definitely seeing, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of golfers saying this was not good. The majority, the consensus is this was not good, this was embarrassing, and this should have never happened.
For sure.
But we can understand it. I think it's very easy to just judge it. But I think that we can understand it. And in understanding, we can learn from it and make sure that this doesn't happen again. I think the PGA Tour is going to definitely have to pivot and change a few things, and that's okay. Live, learn, make mistakes, move on. But getting back to the mental game of what we saw outside of this behavior. And again, every once in a while, the hostility of the crowd works its way into the mental game chat. But, just being able to see players like Rory, react to the crowd, get centered again, and stiff shots to a few feet is incredibly impressive. That's just next level impressive, right? So if we're talking to our amateur golfer crowd, this is something that we've talked about in previous pods, and we're going to bring it up again, right? Things that you can apply to your game, and that is your ability to center, your ability to get present again, and understanding that we're not like the pros, right? This is a whole other mental game. Not yet. These guys can feed off of that negativity. We've talked about them before. They're the 1% of the 1%, they're the outliers. They're the ones that can do that, where us as amateur golfers, anything can knock us off of our game and we can lose it. We can spiral. We have these, emotional reactions. Our nervous systems go haywire. But for them, they're where they are for a reason. And being able to see that, when Rose gets into it with Bryson's caddy, and both sides are flustered, right? There's been a little issue here. On my take of that, I find it very hard to believe that a caddy doesn't know not to cross down, another player's line, whether it was an accident or not. Sure, could it have been an accident? Sure. Do I think it was? Absolutely not. I think this was strategic. I think this was more mind games that kind of ended up in the players or the caddies.
At that level.
Yeah, we also need to kind of be careful that the crowd is not affecting the way we're conducting ourselves within the ropes. And I didn't agree with this one. Could it have been that it was a mistake, or he didn't
was
mean,
stress
or
from everything?
Sure,
maybe?
Absolutely. That's actually the best way to look at it, Laurie, is that stress can get the better of you, and then, oh shit, I'm stepping on your line. Tensions are already high. But then to see both guys drop their putts afterwards, again, just speaks to the level of mental game that these guys have, right? So these are all things that we can take as golfers. And again, going over just here for a few things that we can do as golfers, that's number one, right? Nervous system regulation, getting back to your breath. As we've discussed before, your breath is what controls your nervous system. These guys had to be very aware
They're good at that.
of what their breath
really
was
good
doing.
at that.
Yeah, like do not sleep on your breath control. And if you're one of those golfers that's just like, oh, the breath, who cares? The breath is tied to your nervous system. Having a long, controlled breath is what regulates and keeps your nervous system from going into fight or flight. And when you're in a crowd like this, it's pretty easy for your fight or flight to go off, but that's number one. Getting present is number two. And what does being present look like? Well, as we've talked about before, Laurie's mentioned past thoughts, future thoughts, and being present, right? The brain can be in three different places. This is one of those times where getting present is going to get you out of trouble. Now, quick little take on past thoughts and future thoughts. I believe that the hurdle that the Europeans faced when it came to where their thoughts were, either past or future. Again, we've mentioned past thoughts, depressive thoughts, future anxiety. The challenge that I believe that the Europeans went through was likely past thoughts. I can't believe that guy just told me that. I cannot believe the crowd, constantly playing things in the past. If I had to guess as a mental coach what hurdle or what they really struggled with the most, was probably that and getting over that. Whereas for the Americans, I believe they struggled with anxiety and future thoughts. Will this work out? Can I please the fans? Where is this going? Can we come back? I feel like they had different beasts to play with. But for you in your game, it's your job to recognize, hey, am I worried about hole 9 while I'm on hole 5? Am I beating myself up about what I did on hole 2 and I'm on hole 5? Am I in the past? Am I in the future? This is a huge part to developing Ryder Cup mental game level of strength.
For sure. And the other thing that I noticed too is obviously these strong mental games, they have very strong mental games, all of them, right, on both teams. That's why they were able to perform as well as they did have after maybe something would kind of happen that for usually with amateurs, it'd get us riled up. So that also tells me that their pre-shot routine is loaded and consistent. So is their post-shot routine. Go and load your who. If you haven't watched that video for our pre-shot routine, that will keep you consistent. You need to be doing it all the time. Same thing with your post-shot routine. That'll have our deep breathing in, inhaling for 4 seconds, exhaling for 4 for at least 2 minutes. Helps you regulate your nervous system, keeps you present. The other thing sometimes that can be helpful, I think that would kind of be applicable here, is that auditory outside noise. It doesn't matter which side you were on, you're still receiving it. You're still getting that auditory sensation and sounds, right? Which can be very unnerving. It's new for everyone, it sounds like. So my suggestion with that is, how do we get grounded? How do we also stay present? Your breath is going to be one because it's always in the present moment. So is your posture. The other strategy that I like using our senses is going to be 3, 2, 1, identifying 3 things that you can see visually, 2 things that you can feel, and then 1 thing auditorily that you can hear outside from that mental noise that's not serving.
And I would say, well, what mental noise are you talking about?
The crowd. That's a distraction.
So going into that one, I would say blocking out the noise is impossible.
All right, so you just notice it.
I think it's
Part of the
impossible.
present.
Exactly. That is the workaround. That's the work. This is actually one of those situations where we can kind of call ourselves out, like, oh, Laurie and I will have these discussions and be like, actually, and this is one of those, right, where, we're saying, block that out. I find that there are some people that can, and I find that it's more energy to try to block it out because that's just too loud. It's too big. In this level of mental game, there is a level of just embracing it, which is, again, why it didn't work, right? Was it getting under their nerves sometimes? Sure, it was. But at the end of the day, their mental games are strong enough to be able to come back, right? But being okay with the noise and going, is this something that's happening right now? Is this happening right now in the moment? Can I hear this noise? Yes. And the trick to look at it is, don't look at it with judgment. What I mean by that is your brain is always going to want to categorize things, good or bad. So long as you look at it as it just is.
Mm-hmm.
This is just what I'm hearing right now. If a plane flies over, we don't have to judge it. If a bird flies by, we don't have to judge it. We can that's just what I heard.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably a huge mental game skill that the players were using to try to override that or successfully override that.
And if it does, I would say feel overwhelming, reminding yourself that you're safe. I know it sounds corny, but usually that's where the stress comes from, that kind of noise, is because it is so different. It is so new.
Mm-hmm.
So recognizing, hey, I'm safe. This is just the noise that's happening right now, but I'm okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then continuing on with your breath, your posture, and then that way you're able to perform, right? Have your swing, have your grip, so things don't go wonky.
No, absolutely. And, but again, we're dealing with the best of the best in the world, and their mental games, again, they're different from ours, right? Everything that we're doing, everything that we prescribe as far as how to update your mental game is in attempts to be closer to that of the best in the world, right? They are able to regulate. One of the other things that I will recommend as a final tip today is on the belief system side. And one of the things that plays a huge factor besides the mental game skills are the beliefs that you have around your game. We heard Rory say during an interview, hey, well, something along, don't quote me, but it was something along the lines of, the player that, or the crowd spectator person who said something about, you're not good at golf, or you're no good, or something along those lines. And Rory comes back and says something like, I'm good. I know I'm good. I'm very good. And I think it's very interesting that anytime as a mental game coach that I get to hear an elite player's belief systems and they just, readily put them out there. And hearing that one is huge because as amateur golfers, one bad shot derails us because we're worried if the good play is going to come back. One bad shot can throw us off of our game because we don't necessarily have a belief system like Rory's that says, I'm good. I'm very good. One bad shot doesn't make Rory concerned where his golf game is headed. He knows that he's in full control of it. And it's those types of belief systems that can serve us as amateur golfers as well. When I hear a golfer say, my game is trash, or how's your game? It's okay. It sucks. Well, those spill into all areas of your golf. That's why some of the biggest work that we do here at Golf Psycho is looking into belief systems, because the belief systems are going to tell us a whole lot. When a player believes he's good, like Rory, he practices like a good player, like he believes he is, right? The practice is good. The weight training is good. The mobility is good. The meditation is good. Everything that he needs to be or to do to be a good golfer gets done. When you're a golfer who believes that you're trash, well, the practice doesn't happen. The gym doesn't happen. The mobility doesn't happen. The mental game certainly doesn't happen, right? So it's really, really interesting to see a player like that, or players just in general, right, in the European and the American side, who are able to get their games together and still show up under all of this pressure because they know they're good, right? They've put in the time to earn that belief system that is changing the way they play. It changes the way they respond. It changes the way they conduct themselves on the course. So I can turn around and say F you and then turn around and stick a shot to 2 feet because it didn't bother me. If anything, it made it worse. Kind of that Michael Jordan type of mentality, right? Whereas if you dare me, oh my gosh, you just opened up a whole can of worms. You just made this worse on yourself, right? So to kind of sum things up, I think that's what we saw. That's my opinion. That's Laurie's opinion. That's what we believe we saw was the hostility of the crowd turn on the Americans. It didn't favor them. It made things worse. The crowd was trying to help them. It didn't make things better. It made things worse. The Europeans were able to jujitsu it against itself and use that energy against itself. And it was at the end of the day great to see them duke it out, mental games, because everyone's a great golfer. At this point, it's about who's got the stronger minds and who can actually show up, right? So fascinating watch, right? Again, I never want to see anything like this again, but if we're going to go through something like this as a collective, then we better take as much as we can from it and learn as much as we can from it.
And there was so much to take from. So just as a quick summary, we talked about responses versus reaction, our negative bias brain, using that positive encouragement when we're trying to cheer someone on, that's more effective, along with our belief systems and how those belief systems go into our actions. And then making sure that we are consistent with our pre-shot and post-shot routines. Those are going to help us regulate our nervous systems on and off the course, along with our breathing. It's always in the present moment. So is your posture, and then so are your senses. So utilizing those tools for your next game.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned something about, all of this. And I quickly had a different way of kind of teeing this up. Imagine you're a golfer, any age, right? Let's just say you're a high school golfer and you're out playing and you're playing against your opponent and your dad won't stop giving crap to your opponent. Me, if that's my dad, eventually
I'm going to be embarrassed.
And that's my point.
Yeah.
That's my point, right? That's on a small scale. This is on a huge scale, so got to talk about that, right? Before we go, that's why I say I don't think any of this favored the U.S. team. It was an attempt to help them, but the U.S. was definitely, whether they realize it or not, dealing with emotions and a pressure that even for them was new. They have seen it all and experienced it all. But like I said, if I was on a tournament as a kiddo, high school golfer, and my dad is going off on my opponent the entire time, that's not going to favor me.
No.
It's like, Dad, I know what you're doing.
Yeah.
I know you're trying to help.
It's not helping.
This is stressing me out, man. Like, on top of it, like we said earlier, like now I have to win, right? If you're doing this and it's not working, that makes the pressure even more. Like, well, Dad, I'm losing more and I'm losing more, like this isn't helping. So that's where I say, I believe mentally they were up against something that they had never seen either.
That's so true.
And that was even different for them. And that's another good way to kind of look at it on a smaller scale and go, yeah, well, that would be really awkward. But because there's so many people and everyone's doing it, well, does it become better? It just becomes easier to not point out one person, right? Which is why we're looking at the collective. Well, it becomes amplified. It's the entire collective American crowd, right? But either way, I have to take my hats off to both teams.
Agreed.
Thank you to both teams for putting on this show. Thank you to these teams for your patience. Thank you to these teams for providing this entertainment for us and going above and beyond. And, I hope that as a fellow American that we can learn from this and never go through that again. And I think that for our own games, there's a lot to take away here. And I'm hoping that this is the last time we see this in golf. There's no place in this in golf. This is a gentleman's sport. This is a gentle ladies sport. This is a respectable sport
A
and
gentlewoman.
a gentlewoman sport. Yes, of course.
Of course.
But of course, darling. And so it's just, it's been interesting.
Mhm.
It's been interesting. Everyone's talking about it nonstop. Every time I open up my feed, it's just Ryder Cup, Ryder Cup, Ryder Cup, Ryder Cup. You know, why? Because we've never seen anything like this before. And
Mhm.
I'm not sure if I mentioned it earlier, but you know, we've got those that are like, no, this has happened in Europe, and
Not at this level.
no, I'm sorry, not at this level. I've got to be honest. Like, I've got to be honest with myself. Like, I can see how it's easy to go down that and be like, you know, every once in a while the banter goes a little too far, but this wasn't banter gone far. This was something else. So it is nice to see that most golfers agree and go, hey, this we don't have a place for this in our game. But if there's any takeaways, if there's anything that we didn't mention, um, we didn't go into specifics as far as, you know, players specifically too much. We talked about, you know, Justin Rose a little bit and his little issue, the issue that he had with Bryson's caddy and that little tiff that took off as they exited the green, and Rory yelling "F you" to the crowd, and obviously Rory's wife being hit with the beer can. And yeah, none of this is good. You know, none of this is good. But at the end of it all, great display of mental game. I'm a huge fan of that aspect of just the level of strengths of these guys' mental games. It's just impressive. It is so cool to watch. Just because, you know, as an amateur golfer myself, I get playing under pressure, and I have an immense respect for that kind of pressure and the want to really react to all of this must have been absolutely overwhelming. And you know, we saw Rory respond a few times or react a few times, and we saw Shane react a few times. And as we mentioned earlier, I don't blame them. You know, like I don't blame them.
Mhm.
It's a response to this behavior. They're not just doing it because they're just doing it. I think every human has a right to respond to kind of that stuff like that. Or if you break and you react when you shouldn't, um, I get it. I
Mhm.
get it. You know, to those that say, well, it's not right, you're not wrong. It's not, but we can understand it. And again, summing up the beginning of this tournament and how it was teed up by the comedian and the events leading up to the beginning of the tournament itself, we can argue, hey, that's what teed up this behavior. Does it excuse it?
No.
No, you know, but again, it falls under that. I understand, you know, I want to understand because as we believe here, in understanding comes growth. And that's how we actually move past our mistakes. But yeah, if there's something we didn't cover, we want to hear from you. If you are listening to this in your car, know that on YouTube there's a visual. You can come and watch this, and we would love to see you here. Your support means the world. If you could come in and subscribe, watch the pod with us, comment if there's something that we missed or didn't talk about, or if we can do a part 2 and then go into, you know, further nitty-gritty of mental game or particular plays or particular holes. Let us know. We can take a deep dive into this. I have a feeling we're going to be talking about this for a moment. So, yeah, be sure to comment, subscribe. We're very, very grateful for you tuning in, and we'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. And if you need help with your golf mental game, maybe it's distraction training, maybe it is getting those pre and post shot routines stronger, or belief systems, or any of those areas, or something else, hit us up at thegolfpsycho.com and schedule your appointment with us. We'd love to see you.
Yeah. And I know that this, you know, this could be a sensitive talk, right? This is something we've never seen before, you know. So I thank you for your patience, for allowing us to express our opinions. And you're entitled to your opinions as well. I think, with you know, we all want good to come from this. We all acknowledge the similarities that we have. We all picked golf. We all picked this game. We all love this game. One could make an argument. This is just an incredible amount of passion gone right. You know, a lot of passion around the team. But I think that that passion can never exceed the level of respect that we need to show. And it's okay to make mistakes. I think
Mhm.
that if I was to speak to the Americans collectively as a mental game coach, talking to the collective fans of the US side, I'd say it's okay to make mistakes, guys. We made a mistake. That's okay. the only thing worse than a mistake is not learning from our
Mhm.
mistakes. And we can be gentle. As a matter of fact, we need the US crowd to be gentle with themselves. We need them to be able to go inward and not to get set off and get upset. Like, oh, well, let me tell you why, or divert and point at something else.
Right.
No. We need to just look at this, own that responsibility. That is true growth and ultimately respect for the game. We can go, yeah, this was not good. Lesson learned. We're never doing that again. And be okay with feeling those feelings. Sometimes when we make mistakes, there's feelings that we end up feeling of just kind of like feelings we don't want to feel, which is why sometimes we avoid that accountability. But those are our feelings to feel. If you ask me, in my humble opinion, it's just my opinion. And I think that's what's going to help us grow from this and continue to enjoy Ryder Cup for years to come, so that it doesn't turn into this event of like, oh my gosh, well, what's going to happen this year? And is it going to be like WWE? And why even tune in? And players don't even want to play it because it's just,
Too toxic.
it's too toxic. So
Yeah.
let us know what you think. But thank you so much for tuning in to the Golf Psycho. We greatly appreciate you. We know that you can place your time absolutely anywhere. Thank you for spending time with us. And can't wait to hear from you guys in the comments.
See you next time.
See you on the next one.